This is Risky Women Radio, a show that connects, celebrates and champions women in risk, regulation and compliance. We're here to share the insights on the biggest issues in our industry and hear inspiring journeys from our global members. Sign up to our newsletter at riskywomen.org. I'm Kimberly Cole, your Chief Risky Woman. Welcome to Risky Women Radio. Today's Risky Woman is a licensed US attorney and a certified fraud examiner with 20 years plus experience of leading and supporting internal audit, fraud detection, legal, risk compliance, due diligence, ethics, integrity, and project management work in public, private, and multinational organizations in the humanitarian and international development sectors. She has a huge range of experience that we will talk about, and let's just share the international environments she has worked in. Angola, Egypt, El Salvador, France, Guatemala, Iraq, Israel, Italy, Jordan, Kazakhstan, Liberia, Malawi, Mozambique, Namibia, Nepal, Nigeria, Pakistan, Rwanda, South Africa, UAE, USA, Uzbekistan, and Zambia. And I like how it was all in alphabetical order. So welcome, Sabrina Segal, Director at the Risk Collaborative.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here today.
Absolutely. I mean, what an amazing list of countries. But before we get into all of that, tell us about the Risk Collaborative, because I'm really interested to learn more.
Sure. So the Risk Collaborative is a nonprofit initiative that was formally launched in January of 2025, but really has sort of been living in my brain rent-free for a few years because as you gave that lovely introduction, I've been in the international development and humanitarian charity nonprofit space for more than 20 years. I started out my career with the US government, so working with a major donor, and then I moved to small, medium, and large international organizations, small national organizations, things like that. And one of the things that I've picked up over the past maybe 10 years of my experience is how the concept of risk has become a lot more crystallized in the third sector. So when I say third sector, it's not the government, it's not the private sector, it's sort of the charity space. When I first started, it wasn't so I don't want to say relevant, but it wasn't so formalized and structured. But over the years, as funders were giving more and more resources, they started requiring more and more structure around risk and compliance and oversight. And the other thing that I found was that a lot of these organizations were established because they saw a need in their community. They didn't necessarily establish themselves because they wanted to manage procurement according to a big INGO's procurement environment. And so the concept of risk in the third sector was not new to these organizations because they were managing risk all the time, but the formality was quite novel. And they started to import a lot of tools and approaches that were used in the private sector, which weren't really appropriate for the third sector. And so I did a little bit of research and was saying, well, what's best practice in risk in the third sector? And I couldn't really find much. And so, over my research over these past 10 or 15 years, we've sort of established the Risk Collaborative, which is really a part of the Charity Finance Group in the UK. They're being wonderful in incubating the Risk Collaborative right now. We're working very closely with them. But it's really a space to provide information, some learning, some collaborative, as it says in the name, get-togethers to talk about and amplify really good and unique and different risk management approaches in the charity sector that really work well for large and small and medium INGOs. So we do advocacy around risk sharing. We do training around different ways to do risk management in the sector. And yeah, it's been a great experience so far. And watch this space because the collaborative is going to be doing a lot more in 2026.
Brilliant. That's fascinating. And obviously you've had an incredibly international career in so many amazing countries that we just heard about. So sort of take us on that journey a bit. You sort of started some of that, but tell us where and how you got to all those places.
So I always knew I wanted to do something bigger. And I went to law school because as a young woman, I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time. And as a young woman living in a capital city, if you really want to get into the mix, it's very difficult because it's usually older men that are kind of running everything. So I realized that I needed some sort of credential, some sort of bona fides in order to be able to continue to move in the direction I wanted. So I went to law school. While I was there, I studied international law and commercial law. There really is no such thing as international law. It's just simply treaties and agreements and what people are willing to compromise on. And I loved that concept. And I also really knew I wanted to get into charities and nonprofits and humanitarian work. So it was a great combination. I was able to start my career with the US Department of State, and what existed at the time was USAID. And that was really launched me into the humanitarian and development space. And then a lot of the countries that you listed, I was able to work in and go to when I was with the US government. I moved into an oversight role in the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction, looking at a lot of the Afghan programs that the US government was funding. And then I had had enough of being in DC, and I moved overseas and really just had some fantastic opportunities with organizations large and small, everything from working in a headquarters on contracts and compliance in the UAE to being in a Syrian refugee camp in Jordan and working on water sanitation and hygiene programming and food distribution. So I've been very lucky in my career. I've sort of had a depth and breadth in the sector and been able to see it at a lot of different levels. And it's been great. It's been a great adventure.
And where are you now?
I am dialing in from Kigali, Rwanda. So probably.
So it was amazing when we got an application for the writing competition from Kigali. It was like, wow.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to let a lot more of the women around here know, because Rwanda is a really fascinating country. I mean, it's a landlocked country in, East Africa, but they've really focused a lot on education. They're focusing a lot on technology and AI. And a lot of people know the country because of the genocide that happened in the 90s, but they've moved on so much more from there. And it's a really fascinating place. So I encourage any of your listeners, come on to the warm heart of Africa, is what they call Rwanda. Come on down.
Yeah, beautiful. And obviously, you've done so many things. If you were going to pick out a highlight, what would you say was the highlight of your career to date, I guess?
I mean, I'm not that old. Come on, don't make me. It's like having to pick one of your favorite children. I mean, I did a lot of really interesting things when I was a lawyer with the government. You really get a great opportunity to negotiate interesting agreements and represent the government in court. But I have to say, I think recently the most exciting thing that I've done is probably launched the collaborative, because there just really was this gap in the space. You have a lot of kind of interest groups around finance and safeguarding and things like that, but nobody was really talking about risk from the charity point of view. Everyone just sort of, it got a big arm wave, and it just said, okay, we're going to fill out this risk register and, everything's going to be fine. But when you really unpack it, it's fascinating. I'm going to get a little nerdy now because I'm actually doing my doctorate. Shout out for the University of Bath in the UK. But my area of research is risk management in charities and nonprofits. And when you get into it, it is such a different operating environment because, for example, if you're doing risk at a bank or a petrochemical company or something like that, you've got your R&D department, you've got maybe your customers, you've got your product, and is quite linear. In the charity space, you can't really define who your customer is, right? Is your customer your funder? Is your customer your beneficiary or your participant in your program? There's a tension there. And there's a lot of questions around power dynamics. And when you mix power and risk and decision making, it can become quite a complex environment. And so, again, with the collaborative, I think that's been the most exciting thing so far, because it's providing a space for charities to think differently about risk, think of it in a more strategic way as opposed to an operational way. And when you're working with organizations that have very limited resources, any little bit of advantage that they can get helps. And I firmly believe that thinking about risk differently can give them such an amazing advantage. And it just delivers more impact in their programming for the communities that need it. So that, I would say, Risk Collaborative is probably the best thing so far.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, really entrepreneurial. And I love it that it's that positive. How does it give you an advantage? How does it differentiate you? And I think you're doing an amazing job. So yeah, really, really great. And what, I guess, when you think about your career, how have you distinguished between a risk that you think is worth taking and risks that you think should sort of signal some kind of caution?
So that's a great question. And it's really funny because I think my training as a lawyer has given me a slightly different point of view on things. A lot of time people go, oh, well, you're a lawyer, you must be very conservative. And it's actually not the case. For me, when I'm looking at risks worth taking, which I would reframe as opportunities, right? Or risks that signal caution, which I would call threats. To me, it's just all about information. It's just, can we go in with our eyes open? You're never going to understand the complete environment, right? But can we understand enough to not only say, well, if all these things go sideways, that's really going to be bad, but also if these things go well, or even if a fraction of them go well, what's our additional impact that we're going to be able to have on our community? And I think to me, that's the most important thing. And so it's funny because people say, oh, well, you're a lawyer doing risk, but you're really encouraging people to push the envelope. That seems a little bit odd. But again, in the charity space, if we don't do that, if we're too conservative, we're never going to have the impactful programming that we really need to have to kind of get things to change in some of the spaces that charities work in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I did some work in the stop slavery space and just so challenging in so many of those areas, and looking at all the different charities trying to do different elements in that area. Yeah, you've got to be, as you are saying, entrepreneurial and look at how you're going to push things and change things. And I guess, I mean, you're doing some amazing things. What's that kind of legacy, or what's that ultimate thing that you want to leave behind in terms of impact?
Well, I mean, hopefully one of the things that the Risk Collaborative is really trying to now start to introduce and some facilitate conversations about is this concept of risk sharing in the third sector. And this goes back to a little bit of what I was talking about earlier with power dynamics and things like that. So, like I said, as I saw over the past maybe 10 or 15 years in my career, risk was becoming more formalized. And organizations were being asked to do more and more oversight compliance reporting with fewer and fewer resources. And what we ended up having was quite a large power gap. We already have a power gap between funders and recipients, but these additional requirements, these additional assurance requirements was making that gap even more. And a lot of organizations were being forced to subsidize these additional things that funders are asking them to do, because the funders won't fund overhead, for example. They won't fund an improved IT system or a better accounting system in order to generate some of these bespoke reports that these funders are demanding. And it was causing organizations to more rapidly go down what's being called the starvation spiral within our space. So organizations are being asked to do more and more with less and less, essentially. And risk sharing is a concept that really should have been around for a while. People do risk sharing in the commercial space, but it's because in commercial transactions, you tend to have equal power and you're doing sort of arm's length transactions. In the charity space, people are running after resources. So risk sharing is now getting its day. And I'm hoping that a lot more advocacy and training and education that we can do with the collaborative will bring that there to help facilitate these conversations between funders and recipients in order to, I'm not going to say shift the power. For the people who work in the third sector, you've heard that phrase a lot, we're shifting the power. I respect that phrase, but I don't believe it, because no funder in their right mind is going to give up their own power. What we need to do is rebalance the power. And we can do that by empowering the recipients so that their power level starts to come close to funders. And we can do that through risk sharing. So I always say that I really want to rebalance the power in the third sector through the lens of risk. And I believe that we can do it because risk is something that funders always want to talk about. So if partners can come to the table empowered and negotiate from a position of strength, then we're able to really start to kind of understand where these funders can be picking up that risk conversation and supporting their implementing partners in a more partnership kind of way.
Fascinating. I really feel like we could have another podcast on so
Let's
many.
do it. Let's do it.
Exactly. So just to leave this section, what do you think is, it doesn't necessarily have to be an emerging challenge, but a challenge in GRC that you think disproportionately requires women's voices in leadership?
That's a really good question. And like we were talking about a little earlier, I think gender, as much as, I was raised second, third wave feminism, women can do anything they want. When you step in a room, and particularly in the risk space, which has been sort of dominated by the male finance types for so long, people look at you and they go, oh, wait, what's she doing here to do risk? But I think that women bring a collaborative nature to decision making, but also a decisive nature. And I feel like women get a really bad rap for being indecisive. And I don't think that's the case. I think if you've looked at any woman that's actually been faced with a decision to make, like, she analyzes everything and she makes it. I haven't really been around a lot of waffling women. I've been around waffling people when an organizational culture is one to waffle. And I kind of try and take that on with my risk conversations. And particularly, I'll say in the third sector, where consensus is so valued. And I get it. We want to get along and we're a charity and I'm here for it. And the problem is when you end up waffling and you're looking for consensus, you end up just being frozen. You don't make any decisions. So I think women's voices in leadership is a combination of that collaborative nature, but also decisive decision making that I think we can edge out men a little bit with the collaborative area and then also being decisive. So I think in governance, risk, and compliance, you need both. And you need to bring people along the journey. And I think that women are really well placed to do that.
This episode is brought to you by Kroll. Stay ahead with Kroll. As the leading independent provider of financial and risk advisory solutions, Kroll leverages their unique insights, data, and technology to help clients stay ahead of complex demands. Thank you. Well, now let's get into what we're here to talk about, because we had our second Rescue Women Rights competition this year, and you had the winning article. And it's a bit of a sad day for some, maybe, but your article bids a fond farewell to the traditional risk matrix. You described it as a beloved relic of the 1970s. Once the darling of boardrooms, it now fades into obscurity, leaving behind a colourful legacy of simplicity in a world that demands nuance. Who knew a grid could be so tragic? So from our judges, you got great feedback, such a clever and innovative approach which uses humour to land the author's point. This obituary style review brilliantly reimagines the traditional risk matrix with a witty, clear narrative that engages readers and demystifies complex risk concepts. The creative framing and approachable tone make the piece highly accessible. Very clever and engaging novel topic, such a good read, and the argument is thought-provoking, and for leaders adds humour into not another heat map and risk assessment. So some fabulous comments there. And so I hope all of our listeners will also go online and read the article, which is published on the Risky Women website, and also the Association of GRC has published, and a few other places. So take a look and have a read. But we're going to go through and give you some more background and information around it. So congratulations on winning.
Thank
firstly.
you so much.
It was great. So, I mean, we had so many great entries, but obviously yours really stood out for everyone. So what inspired you to sort of write an obituary for the risk matrix?
Well, again, I want to just thank the judges and everyone for selecting this. I'll be honest with you. I was on the call when you announced the winners, and there was a fourth place and a third place and a second place. And I was listening to the titles and I was hearing about the content, and I was like, there is no way my cheeky, article about a risk matrix dying can even compete with these women. And I've read the other articles since then, and they are all amazing and just so well thought through and well written. And I just kind of, when you guys said that you should have seen my face, I was just like, oh my God. So thank you very much. I'm glad, again, that my tongue-in-cheek article caught people's attention. What inspired me to write this? I'll be honest, frustration. I am so frustrated with just having to continue to say, guys, these tools that you're using, you're spending so much time on your board meetings, you're arguing whether something should be amber or red or green, and it's not really helping you do much of anything. So people who know me, who've listened to my podcast or know why I write on LinkedIn and things like that, understand that I have this love-hate relationship with matrices and registers and appetite statements. And so really, I just said, how can we get more attention on this? And humor is something that I try and use a lot. If people know me on LinkedIn, I've got ridiculous memes that I use and things like that. So, it was frustration, but also trying to just get another platform to amplify the message that there's better ways to manage risk out there and you don't need to use these colorful boxes anymore.
Now, you mentioned your podcast, and I kept meaning to ask that. So, name of the podcast so we can put a link in as well.
So the podcast is called Tolerable Risk. It's got 35 episodes, but I haven't done any recently. And basically, something had to give when I started my doctorate. And so the podcast was put on hiatus. Fair enough.
Fair enough. But we'll still go back and look at that.
Yeah. And the 35 episodes are really interesting. I think a lot of them are still quite relevant. Again, it's focused on charities and nonprofits. But also it's interesting. I had a lot of small businesses reach out to me when I was doing the podcast and say, look, we're functioning in a low to no resource environment as well. And a lot of these episodes have been quite helpful for them too. So have a listen.
So back to the risk matrix.
Yes.
Why do you think it became so beloved and enduring for so many decades in the boardroom?
I think anything that has colors is easy. And I think that over time, the matrix sort of just became this symbol of, it's like a traffic light. Is it red, yellow, or green? Everyone understands that it's easy. There's a reason why kindergartners start with colors, but risk isn't a kindergarten level exercise. It doesn't have to be rocket science, but we need a little bit more nuance. And we are working right now, no matter what sector you're in quite a volatile and uncertain environment. I can go into a lot of the analytical details about why matrices don't work. I mean, it's taking subjective concepts and trying to apply a quantitative approach to them. I always joke around with people and I say, oh, well, what's better, a 4x4, a 5x5, even a 6x6 matrix? Which one's better? And the answer is none. They're all rubbish. And that's why people hear me say, burn your risk matrix. It's not worth your time. And valid enough, people come back and say, oh, well, it's not the matrix itself, it's the conversation. And I go, yes, absolutely. But the problem is that those matrices are then sort of hung up on a pedestal and paraded out once a quarter. The board blesses it with holy water. Everyone gives high fives. Look at us. We're managing risk. And it's theater. It's risk theater. And you pile on that a 278 line risk register and then a risk appetite statement that has no linkage to reality. And everyone's like, but all the time that we spent on all of this. And my frank response is, yeah, it's kind of wasted. There's way better approaches where you can still have those really valuable conversations that everyone says, well, that's the value. But you actually end up with something at the end of those conversations that helps you make better decisions. And that's the kind of risk management I think that we need to start moving towards.
And when did you make this realization that the register was really not helping?
So I was the head of risk and compliance for Save the Children in Egypt. And I remember sitting at my desk one day and getting an email from one of the business development teams or the fundraising team and saying, we're going for this particular opportunity. We need you to look at the risk package. And this was about 4 hours before they had to submit. So first of all, I was like, risk is obviously not getting a whole lot of valuable attention. Nothing against the organization. I love SAVE. They do amazing work and they have since changed their ways, but I'll tell you why. And so I remember just getting really frustrated and going, this is not how we manage risk. Again, this is theater. We're ticking a box. We're not really having the conversations that we need to have around this. I was so frustrated that I fired off an email to the head of risk of Save the Children International in London. I had no idea who he was. His name is V. Sharma. He and I have since become quite good friends. But I remember firing off an email from, I'm this new person in Cairo going, the way you do risk management's rubbish. It doesn't work. Why do you do it this way? This is awful. And from that point is sort of when I started talking more about objective-centered risk management, which I believe is much better structured for the charity space. And he and I became quite good friends. And I kind of told him a little bit more about this concept. He looked into it himself. And SAVE is now really wonderfully starting to integrate objective-centered risk management into their enterprise risk management as well as their project approach, which I think is working out a lot better for them too. So yeah, I personally had that I want to burn it all down moment when I was faced with a matrix with 4 hours to review it and going, there's got to be a better way.
And in the article, you mentioned diverse perspectives from behavioral science, system thinking, data science. They all expose the limitations of the matrix. And so you started to talk there a bit about what's better. So tell us then on that, what are those perspectives that you think have the biggest impact?
I think fundamentally, the matrix is always presented as a quantitative tool because it has numbers. But you barely have to scratch the surface to realize that it's all subjective. What does likelihood and impact mean? Or is anybody who's making these judgments, as Doug Hubbard writes in his books, are they calibrated? Like, do they know what they're talking about? Is this just a gut feeling, someone's finger in the air? Where is any of this judgment coming from? Also, not to mention the fact that they are quite backwards looking. They're static. They're not linked to what organizations are trying to achieve. And they're certainly not linked to resourcing, which again, in the charity space is just of critical importance. Between behavioral science and systems thinking and data and all the kind of new things that we know now, for me, I think that primarily the behavioral science element is really important. Again, speaking from the third sector, the charity sector, is we deal with a lot of humans. Like, we're not making widgets on a manufacturing line where we can get an engineer to estimate when we need to do phased maintenance on a particular machine. We're dealing with very complex things in very unstable environments, and it's humans and people all the time. So that behavioral science element, I think, is missing in the matrix and the register and a lot of other things that we use traditionally. One of the things that I would point to is, for example, in economics, you have the concept of a rational actor, but we know that the rational actor doesn't exist. And so why would we make that assumption that it exists in risk management as well? I think secondarily, the systems thinking is really important too. Again, when you're working in a dynamic environment like the charity space, I like Dave Snowden's Cynefin approach. I read a lot of his stuff. It's really influenced sort of the organic way of thinking about risk and crisis, and feeding in concepts of resilience to that as well. And I think, again, charities, especially right now more than ever, really need to be thinking a lot more about agility, not big A, agile software development, but just being able to pivot, be aware of what's coming down the road in front of them, identify those things, pivot, adjust, and then accelerate through it. All organizations need to do that, but I think charities in particular do as well.
So you mentioned their objective-centric risk assessment, and that really coming to the fore. So why is it shifting from impact to likelihood to uncertainty around objectives? Why is that so powerful?
Well, in the charity space, which is really where I focus, again, when we have a low to no resource environment, we don't have the luxury of having a risk team or having a lot of data that you can pull from. The folks who love their quantitative tools, love their Monte Carlo simulations and all of that, I respect them. I wish we could do more of that in the third sector space, because I think it brings an additional dynamic to your analysis. However, the problem with those quantitative heavy tools is you really need a clean and verified data set in order to run those regressions or to, run your simulations. In the charity space, we don't really have that data set. And so it's very difficult to get a useful output from a quantitative tool. And so that's why I think the objective-centered approach gets a really great variety of input on the qualitative side. So the objective-centered risk management approach that I talk about for charities is based on Tim Leach's objective-centered, shout out to Tim, big fan of his. He's sort of like a mentor to me. He's fantastic. But he developed the objective-centered uncertainty rating approach for the private sector, and it's very thorough. It's too thorough for charities. And so he and I talked about this, and I took a lot of what he did and I pared it back, and I made it much more applicable to charities and nonprofits. And what it does is it takes that objective-centered approach and it layers over it a systems mapping. And it sounds more complicated than it really is. But essentially what I do is I'll take a cross-section of team members who are trying to achieve a particular objective, whether it's a strategic objective or a project objective in a charity. And we ask a series of questions. The first question we ask is, what are your threats? What's going to prevent you from achieving that objective? And then what are your opportunities? What can enhance the achievement of your objective? Traditional risk approaches don't ever ask about opportunities. And when you're dealing with a charity, and one of the things I love about working in the charity space is that no matter who you are an optimist. You cannot be a pessimist and work in the charity space. because you want to make the world a better place. And I love it, right? So you're either an optimistic optimist, you are a pessimistic optimist, or you are an optimistic pessimist, but you can never be a pessimistic pessimist and work in the charity space. So why are we not giving these optimistic folks an opportunity to say, what are the opportunities that could actually make this objective even more impactful for these communities? So usually when I do these training sessions, people like grumble and they're rolling their eyes and they're like, oh, risk, it's so boring. As soon as I put that question on the table, people's ears perk up and they go, oh, wait a minute. There is a way that we could make this child financial literacy program even more impactful. There is a way that we could make this childhood nutrition program more impactful. There is a way we could make this environmental protection more impactful. And then I've got them hooked on risk and they love it after that. So basically we start with those two questions and then we sort of do a modified mind map. We go into what are the causes of these threats? What are some indicators that may be on the horizon that this opportunity is coming our way? And then we go to what are our preparation elements? And so at the end of it, they end up with sort of what I call a flying spaghetti monster, but it's all around the objective, right? The objective sits in the middle, and then you're able to actually see it's a one-to-many and many-to-one connection. And they're able to kind of then look at this. We do it on a Miro board or in person. I'll do it with a bunch of sticky notes. After about 45 minutes, they're able to step back and go, this is the operating environment that my objective has to survive in. It's like having a kid and sending them out into the world, right? The world is a dynamic place. Risk is not linear. That's the other thing about traditional tools. We've got our original risk and then we do these magical things and then we have our residual risk. And isn't that great? That's very linear. We don't exist in that world. And so I think that this objective-centered approach for low to no resourced organizations and particularly for charities, it just gives them such a better view. And then with the preparation steps, which is the last question we ask them, they then get to price those and then put them into the budget. And that becomes a real tangible go, no go for management. Because you can then go back and say, do you want us to achieve this objective? Here's the resources that we need. Is it a go, no go? Instead of, is it yellow or is it whatever? We said we're going to do this active monitoring or we're going to do this mitigation. And if we don't have the resources to do it, we need to go back and adjust the objective. And it's very practical. And they see the value in it right away. After about 45 minutes, organizations are like, this is great. It's very practical. So it links to the objective. It's forward-looking.
Yeah, exactly. Practical, action-oriented. You can make a decision off the back of it.
Absolutely. And it links to their resourcing. So that's why I think the objective-centered approach is really good for the third sector.
Yeah, fantastic. And obviously, look, the way you framed this obituary format is very fun and playful, etc. And it sounds like the way you're also bringing your programs has an element of storytelling and this optimism, etc., that really helps make risk more accessible. Is that the intention?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny because I do these workshops and people go, I've never been so excited about risk in my life. I think a lot of it comes back to when I was starting out my career as a young lawyer, particularly with USAID, I was giving ethics training. And I was giving anti-corruption training and I was giving data protection training and stuff that can be really dry. And I remember after the first couple of sessions, even I was getting bored. I was like, I got to do something else. And so I found ways to make that information, which is so important, accessible and entertaining and really try and customize it to the audience. I used to give talks at conferences from the government point of view about how to negotiate a good cloud computing contract. And I used to have a stuffed broccoli. I got it at like IKEA. I think it was like a stuffed animal broccoli thing. And I used to joke around and say, you're going to have a lot of other people at this conference who are going to be talking about really exciting things. It's going to be like the ice cream and the cake and the sugar and the biscuits. I am here to talk to you about how to negotiate a contract, and that is your vegetables. And you need to eat your vegetables. You need to know how to do this in order to do all the other fun stuff. So here you go. Here's your broccoli for the conference. And, studies show that when people laugh, they get more interested, they wake up a little bit more and they pay more attention. And anything that's boring and dry, like you're never going to get your point across. So why not be a little bit more silly about it?
And at least everyone's going to say, did you hear the woman who was speaking about the broccoli and we need to eat our vegetables?
Yeah. And that's why I am such a huge risk nerd, but I firmly believe that if we can get folks to be thinking about risk from a strategic point of view, as opposed to an operational point of view, we can exponentially really increase the impact of anything any organization wants to do. And I wrote an article a little while ago about why risk should be sitting in your strategy unit and not under like your finance or your operations unit. Compliance can sit under finance and operations. That's fine. It's a checklist. Anyone can do compliance. Sorry, compliance people out there. I know it's very important, but I think, you have a lot more structure or kind of around compliance. Risk is genuinely like, are we going to take this opportunity or are we going to shelter because of a threat? And there's no black or white answer around that. And we need to think about it from a strategic point of view. And risk provides value, so much value. It's hard to quantify, but it's one of those things that if you do it well and you kind of know it when you see it and you get it integrated into the organization, it can make such a difference.
Absolutely. So is there anything from the Matrix legacy that you think that risk professionals should carry forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Matrix absolutely had its moment in time and it served honorably. We'll have an eternal flame for the Matrix. But I think one of the things it did highlight was that talking about risk is important and putting some sort of structure around how you facilitate those conversations is important. The Matrix, I don't think, is the right way for how the world is today. But I do think that talking about it is important. The thing is that right now, time is extremely valuable. Time is the most valuable, I think, we have. And so we need to make it count. And I think we need to use tools that add value and don't add theater is the way that I would look at it. So I think let's take that. We get a lot of value about having the conversation away from it, but then let's structure those conversations so we get even more value from the conversation.
Sounds great. Now, finally, in this section, if you had to write another obituary for an outdated tool or practice in risk, what would that be? I think I'm going to ask this question to everyone from now on because I think it's a good one.
I think 3 lines of defense is the next one in the crosshairs. And I have seen more people, although I know I'm going to get probably a lot of hate mail, a lot of harassing on LinkedIn. But again, I think it was a great structure. It is, or was, I think, a great structure for thinking about dynamic operating environments. But I think that analogy now, we need to move on to the next phase of what the 3 lines of defense actually means. When we silo anything, we cut it off at its knees. And 3 lines of defense, I think, is siloed. It's very much a bolted on concept as opposed to a built in one because it draws lines. And I think, again, for manufacturing, where you had a very clear, this is where we make the widget, this is where we do the QA, QC for the widget, you could have that. But when we move into an information economy, and I mean, with AI, what line of defense is AI now? I think that the 3 lines of defense concept has had its day, but we need to move on from that. Now, I'm not one of those people that's going to say, well, risk is everyone's responsibility, because when you say that, it becomes no one's responsibility. But this is why I really think risk and these types of ways of thinking need to be built in. And that's why it's so important that we put it into strategy and just good decision making. Like when I do objective-centered risk management workshops and then I show people like the dashboard, they go, the objective certainty rating, that's just performance management. And I go, exactly. We should not have is this particular risk accelerating or decelerating? I mean, you end up now with these registers and you've got like 18 columns across and 1,000 rows down. And now you have colors and arrows doing different things. And I'm like, no. Like, we don't need any of that. We need to actually say, are we achieving what we're here to achieve? That's good performance management. If we're not achieving what we're here to achieve, it means we're not managing our threats. Something is getting us off course. So build risk in, don't bolt it on. So yeah, I mean, I think the 3 lines of defense is probably what I would say. Next year for Risky Women, I'm going to write an obituary for 3 lines of defense.
Well, I think it's interesting because of all the conferences I've been to recently, there's a lot of discussion over the 3 lines. Are they going to consolidate? How are they going to change? What's the impact of AI? So it's definitely an interesting one that we will watch this space.
Yeah.
So thank you for all of that. Now we're going to have a quick wrap up, and I have just modified this. So you are the first guinea pig, because generally on the wrap up, we've tried to do it like give us quick, short, punchy answers, but we have not achieved that. So let's see how we go on this one. This is our fast
Do my best.
fire round. Okay, so risk taker or risk averse?
Informed risk.
Ooh, your leadership superpower.
Curiosity, closely followed by humor.
Okay. One word that defines your career.
Grateful. Grateful for the amazing opportunities that I've had.
And a top skill required for the future.
There's so much uncertainty now that we can't walk into something and make assumptions. So we genuinely, there was the quote, it was lead with curiosity and not judgment. The more curious you are, the better off you're going to be because you're going to have a lot more information to make your decisions on.
And finally, what's the future of GRC, governance, risk and compliance, in a single word?
Dynamic.
Oh, nice. Excellent. Well, I think you performed really well.
Okay. Woohoo!
So I think I can keep some of those questions. Excellent. Well, look, it has been an absolute delight to speak with you. And I am sure we need to have more conversations because there is just so many interesting things that you're doing. And maybe once you've finished your PhD, you can come back and tell us more about what you found there.
That'll be a few years, but yeah, happy to do it. And also for the Risky Women community, I know that, a lot of the women are in the commercial space, but if any of them are in the third sector space, or if any of them are interested in moving into that space, or even better, if any of them are interested in becoming trustees, because charities and nonprofit really desperately need people who understand this because they are adrift in this volatile environment right now. Please reach out. I would love to chat with you about how you can use your skills to help really well-deserving organizations in your community. And I'm sure that if you knocked on their door and said, I'm a risk person and I'd love to be a trustee, they would welcome you. So please, anybody who's listening, feel free to reach out.
That is a great idea. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Sabrina. Thank you for entering the writing competition. Thank you for joining the podcast. And thank you for being an amazing risky woman.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. And again, I'd love to continue the conversation whenever you'd like.
Fabulous. Thank you. Be part of the ongoing conversation and learn more about our events and other programs at riskywomen.org.